Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the OECD Knowledge Partner Series and to this session on forecasting good governance organized by the Hertie School in Berlin. My name is John Brucci, and I'm a research coordinator at Transparency International. The focus of my work is on corruption measurement, and I'm part of the team that calculates the Corruption Perceptions Index and runs the Global Corruption Barometer survey. The CPI is, of course, the most widely used governance indicator, and the Global Corruption Barometer, one of the largest household surveys. But today's session, Forecasting Good Governance, will cover the important topic of dealing with the Achilles heel or the Achilles heels of our existing indicators, their slow responsiveness to policy changes, particularly incremental policy changes, and also their inability to determine what interventions trigger institutional evolution. We will talk about the need for forward-looking tools, and we'll zoom in on some of their practical uses in anti-corruption policy and programming. To discuss this, I'm joined by a fantastic panel, and it is my honor to introduce our distinguished speakers. I'm joined by Alina Mungiu-Pipidi, who's a professor of democracy at the Hertie School in Berlin and chair of the European Research Center for Anti-Corruption and State Building. In addition to having authored many groundbreaking books and articles on the topic, Alina and her team have created the Index of Public Integrity and more recently the Public Integrity Forecast, which we will discuss today. Frank Brown is the Director of Anti-Corruption and Governance at the Center for International Private Enterprise, CIPE. His activities focus on streamlining CIPE's existing programming and exploring innovative approaches based on new partnerships, economic trends, and law enforcement priorities. The work that he and his team are doing on rapid response interventions is really inspiring, and I hope we will have time to discuss in today's session. And of course, Michael Johnson is a professor emeritus at the Department of Political Science at Colgate University. He is widely regarded as one of the founders of anti-corruption as an academic discipline and the author of many seminal texts in the canon of anti-corruption literature, including a 4-volume anthology on public sector corruption and a 2005 classic called Syndromes of Corruption. And his latest book, The Conundrum of Corruption, will be published in January. So without further ado, let me start with you, Alina, to tell us a little bit about what the forecast of good governance is and how it works.
Thank you very much, John. So what really motivated us is the fact that for many people who are daily engaged in anti-corruption, some of us as academics, others as civil society activists, others as consultants or workers in international organizations, and who make from 5 years plans of anti-corruption to quite a lot of interventions, some more bureaucratic, others really brave. It is very depressing that the world looks very much like in this slide of mine. The world for the past 20 years looked extraordinarily flat. And this flatness, of course, it's very easy to blame on the indicators that we have. And I think that it is blamed on the indicators being just averages of other indicators. And those indicators also are completely non-transparent indicators. So we really don't know very much what happens. But what seems to happen is that nothing happens, so to put. So the world is fairly flat when governance is concerned. The quality of governance has not evolved very much for the past 20 years. And it may be that the world really doesn't change, or it may be that our indicators are insensitive and do not capture this change. And it is rather essential to understand the difference between these two phenomena, because if we do not understand the difference, then really we do not know if the strategies that we have in place are working or not. Like this, if you look that the world doesn't change, you are tempted to say that nothing works. But for sure, we can qualify that and come to more subtle conclusions. So the need of capturing change and the need of having some sort of an evaluation of the anti-corruption tools and their impact is what has driven our idea that we can create a better instrument. And this better instrument should be based on more observable things, and the observable things we had already identified and put in the index for public integrity, which is simply based on the causes of corruption. In particular, the most easier to trace, the most easier to observe, and those which in the good governance community are regularly measured. And therefore, what we decided we will do is that we will simply look at these determinants of corruption, at causes of corruption for the past 10 years, in order to understand if things, not only if things change or not, but what are the reasons why we seem to be stuck. And this, of course, yields quite a lot, but also it is from the onset a bit depressing, because we do not want to predict future just based on the past. We want to give hope to people. And then we thought that we will look at this 10 years causes of corruption, but in the same time, we will try to amend it by what people do and by how strong the demand of people is in current times. John?
Yes, so I know that both our panelists have been involved with the forecast, and so let me ask you, Michael, first on some concrete country examples. Where do we see some positive trends? Where do we see negative trends? And what does this tell us?
Well, that's right. Thank you. I think to build on Alina's comments, no change in an indicator doesn't mean nothing is happening. And in many of the countries that we have looked at very carefully, we see a variety of developments in tension. We see institutional problems, in some cases getting worse, at the same time that pressure for better governance is increasing. And sometimes it's hard to tell the good news from the bad, because where that pressure for better governance increases, we will sometimes see an outbreak of scandals. Is that good news? Is that bad? Peru, it seems to me, is an excellent example of a country like that. You can look at the news and you can see the dizzying succession of presidents and presidencies, the controversy between the legislative and the executive, and superficially think that the situation is falling apart. But on the other hand, what we're seeing is a real upswelling, I think, of demand that corruption be brought under control, that a country that has Peru's immense social and economic potential is not being well served by its government. So we look at the recent history versus the emerging demands for reform, and we see both a tension that is very complex. The more factors we take into account, the more difficult it is to come up with a neat and simple sort of assessment. But at the same time, we see new parties emerging in the legislature. We see new in the parliament. We see new assertiveness coming from that direction. And we think there's reason, therefore, to be cautiously optimistic. So this is the kind of assessment that we've tried to reach, and it's a complicated matter of balancing a variety of trends, but trying to come up with a plausible assessment for coming years. Other countries, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Chile, again, show much more complexity beneath the surface than one might have thought, and we have tried to capture some of that in both an understandable way and yet in an assessment that is reasonably complete.
If I may jump in on this Peru example, just to illustrate how this works. So Peru is a country that we forecast positively. Of course, all our forecasts, ironically enough, were from before the pandemics. All right, so this really hit when we were very happy that this forecast produces more positive change than the usual governance indicators. And therefore, for people such as our colleague Frank Brown, who's running a program where, in fact, de facto interventions are put up to help countries which have windows of opportunity for change. And this seems to be like more windows of opportunity for more countries than we thought. But then, you know, when you look at a place like Peru, what you see is 10-year trends which seem to be favorable, but definitely the country is not there. All right, so it's not enough to have the 10-year trends where to say, oh, okay, they reduced a little, they have less administrative burden than they have a little bit more fiscal transparency than they have, and in fact more than their neighbors. So this country didn't really lose time in the last 10 years. But is this sufficient? Of course, it's not sufficient. And then we weight this twice. First, we weighted by recent political contingencies. If in particular new political events happen which seem to favor anti-corruption, and at the time when we did this, They had an anti-corruption president and quite an important revolution really going on into the country, in the judiciary, in the parliament and whatever. Now, you know, a couple of weeks ago, the parliament suspended their anti-corruption president, okay? So it's of course a big risk to do a forecast. But then people came out in the street and redeemed him. And here I come to the third factor. So we wait first for these recent political events. Say Slovakia elected an anti-corruption president, a person who has never in her entire life been in politics. So yes, this is something, you know, the role of agency, that you should allow it to come in these long-term structural indicators. And then there is the second weight. And the second weight is for sustainable demand for good governance, which is like the permanent indicator which shows to what extent people in a country are able to put up a structured demand for good governance. They are economically autonomous and motivated to have this good governance. And these three elements together, in fact, some of them more quantitative, other based on this qualitative assessment, the double weight that I just described, they are putting together in the end the 120 countries that we forecast on the basis of the Index for Public Integrity.
So Peru is really trying to prove your methodology right in this case. So thank you to the citizens of Peru for being on your side with this one. Frank, did you have a couple?
For them.
Frank, did you have a couple of country examples that you wanted to zoom in before we talk a little bit more later about the impact?
So yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about how useful the forecast is likely to be as we move forward with our project. And just to reiterate what others have said, our work, which we call rapid response, anti-corruption rapid response, was based upon our experience in Ukraine during the Revolution of Dignity in 2014, 2015. It grew out of that experience. And the realization that often, because large development actors and donors aren't able to quickly support the momentum that's been gained when you have a window of opportunity opened, there are a lot of lost opportunities. So what we did was put together a program that could very quickly deploy resources to support, especially civil society organizations. But the data we had to make the judgment of where to intervene was really not that great. So that's why the forecast is useful. What we've been relying upon was either very high level analysis, or else, you know, highly granular analysis, anecdotal, coming from practitioners and diplomats and journalists on the ground. And it wasn't a really useful combination. So when we went into the Gambia, for example, a few years ago, we seriously underestimated the capacity of local civil society and what Alina was talking about, the sustainability of the movement. And I think that going forward, we'll be better able to avoid those sorts of pitfalls as we decide where to intervene.
Thank you. So let me ask the same question to Alina and to Michael as well. So now that we have this resource, how can we use it to maximize impact, to be able to do the sort of things that we currently cannot do with the existing corruption measurement tools that we have?
Well, the way this works is this. I mean, it comes up in the form of a map. The map has this 124 countries something, because we do not have sufficiently good data for more than this. In fact, what we're trying to is to get better data for the countries that we already have. But of course, we're open to any suggestions and the data that people might send to expand this. So you just go to map, you click on the map and you come to your country and you come in a screen like this. And the screen will actually explain to you, as you see on the right-hand side, what is really missing in this country to close and have a good equilibrium of control of corruption, and also how this has been evolving. What is really the barrier of getting this? Now, to people who may be surprised and who think that anti-corruption or successful anti-corruption is made of 5-year plans and adoption of legislation and signing of treaties, I think all this play a very large role in establishing anti-corruption and good governance as a norm. But we know, of course, from our research work, from our statistical work, that there is no correlation between the more rules you adopt or the lengthier anti-corruption plans that you have and the progress that you have. In fact, we have a little bit of an opposite correlation, which is, intuitive, because we know that the countries in the world which control corruption the best are not the over-regulated countries, are the actually countries with rather light regulation and with very, very strong normative constraints, with strong demand from society. So you have to go and see what is working and what is not working in terms of these big factors. And this will help you orient your anti-corruption strategy better. I mean, if you have a country who has been stagnating for the past 10, 20 years, in the end of the day, we have 19 countries which seem to be on a positive trend, a fewer which seem to be on a negative trend, and indeed a big bulk of countries which do not move anywhere. So definitely you have to consider a little bit what is keeping the countries stuck, and to see if something can be done about it or not. In countries which are evolving positively, you definitely have to help whatever positive local tendency exists. And in countries which are backsliding, you have to think in terms of international sanctions and things like this. Obviously, there's not much as an external you can do to influence the situation in this country, right? What you will see is the explanation and the long-term trends here. And then these are the countries which evolved well, countries which have like green flags, where something positive is going on in terms of domestic agency. And there are countries where we should learn lessons or support local reformers. And then there are the red flags, countries which are actually not going well. And some of them, you know, like Bosnia-Herzegovina that Michael cited, are countries which really have very, very comprehensive good governance regulations and a lot of investment from EU and other countries. So simply classifying these countries into countries which are not going to change. We forecast that despite whatever anti-corruption framework they have, they are not going to change. And very likely the reasons why they don't change is a political reason. Either their judiciary is not independent enough, or the freedom of the press impact has been going down for the past 10 years. And these are very closely tied with control of corruption. And definitely helping the press is not something which is mainstream anti-corruption work, but maybe this is an area where we could think, you know, definitely their anti-corruption agency is not going to work because their judiciary is not independent, but maybe we can do something to help the press. But anyway, we should think a little bit on how to strengthen what works there and develop it further without expecting any future developments. On backslide countries, as I said, I think that, you know, sanctions and how to support the few reformers who exist in these countries, because if the country is backsliding, those people are probably in big danger. So what they need are not you know, consultants to come up proposing to adopt new whistleblower anti-corruption laws, because it's already a situation when we are past that. So they need really political support simply to survive until better times come. So simply cutting down into these three contexts and assessing whatever you might be doing now in terms of anti-corruption strategy in light of these three situations, where the country is going, we think will help strategize a little bit what looks at times as a very uniform anti-corruption effort across the countries, and which is unjustifiably uniform because we have this variety of countries and these three very different situations.
This helps us a lot as well at Transparency International, I think, where every year we look at the Corruption Perceptions Index and we calculate the statistically significant changes. And as you said, there's about 19 up, 19 down, and most of them are not seeing much change. We have the same sort of situation with the CPI, so it's good to see that our indicators are going in similar directions. And I can definitely see a use for us here where we see that there's been statistically significant decliners in the CPI, but we can't really explain what's behind that. And your tool would be very useful to us as an NGO to shed a little bit more light behind these changes. I'm also curious to know what Michael thinks about the impact of this tool and how it can be used in anti-corruption policy and programming.
Right. I think there's a tremendous amount of potential here, both in terms of corruption and in terms of our movement. There's kind of a chronic problem we have. Collectively, we know a tremendous amount, but synthesizing it, diffusing it, and at the same time implementing our knowledge in ways that are sensitive to the local context is a very difficult thing. And what the hope is, I think, that a forecast-oriented tool or set of tools would help us to share and aggregate what we know, and at the same time respond and even anticipate in useful ways events that will have to affect our strategies and will affect the actions of people in the countries themselves. Now, that doesn't mean that we get a nice A, B, C, D sequence of actions, but we get an alert to what we should be watching out for, trying to understand. And I think via this kind of process as well, there's a chance for extremely useful feedback to see what does not work, what does work, to try to collectively make sense of it, and then to synthesize into a forecast. Now that is, as I say these things, I'm sort of giving the anti-corruption, wish list that we all might have. But I think the forecast has a way of directing our attention to those dynamic connections.
Thank you very much, Michael, Alina, and Frank. Everyone is encouraged to go and check out the public integrity forecast at againstcorruption.eu/forecast. Here you'll see a list of freely available resources from ERCAS. Any last words from Alina before we close?
Well, we really do hope that people will find this useful. We know our colleagues from SAIPI who try to support countries will have a little bit of of a landing created for them, although of course there's considerable more country work to be done in any case. And I really would like to thank the people of Peru and the people of Brazil and other countries that we really took a risk to forecast positively, for putting on such a great fight and proving us right that it is domestic agency and civil societies in countries which can really achieve sustainable success. Thank you very much for watching.
Thank you.